What's up, YouTube? This is Too Raw for TV. Alright, so before I get into this video, I want to give a big shout out to the brother Clayton Phillips for the donation. Once again, showing love. Shout out to Clayton, man. Shout out to him, man. Showing love, man, all the time. Once again, showing love to the channel with the donation via the PayPal. Much respect to him for showing love to Too Raw for TV. So this is a question that I got from one of my subscribers, and that is, who are your top 10 players of the early 2000s? He says, I feel like that era doesn't get talked about enough. You may disagree with my choices, but I'd like to hear your thoughts on this. So keep in mind, he said early 2000s, not the entire 2000s. So to me, when you say the early 2000s, I'm thinking 2000 to 2003, all right? Maybe going into 2004, but I kind of consider that more going into the mid-2000s. But let's just say the first third of the 2000s, 2000, 2003, going into 2004, all right? Now, I tried to do a top 10 as best as possible. I had to think about it. Didn't want to just do some on the fly. So these are my top 10 players of that era. At number 10, I have Dirk Nowitzki. Now, Dirk was just starting to get, to help turn around that team, the Dallas Mavericks. And, matter of fact, let me do something right quick. Do something. I think this will be appropriate. So I want to look at Dirk's. So Dirk was just starting to become an all-star, especially 2001, 2002. As we all know, Dirk struggled his first year in the NBA, almost quit, almost went back to Germany, but he persevered, and by 2001, 2002, Dirk was an all-star, and I believe 2003, they were playing the Spurs. I believe that was in the Western Conference Finals, if I'm not mistaken, right? I think it was the Western Conference Finals. And if Dirk had not hurt his knee, perhaps, maybe, Dallas could have won a title. We don't know that. During that time period, from 2000 to 2003, Dirk averaged 23.4 points, 9.7 rebounds, 2.5 assists, 1.1 steal, 1.1 blocks, 47.1% shooting from the floor, 38.8% from downtown, and 85.8% from the charity stripes. That's Dirk Nowitzki at number 10. At number 9, I have Jason Kidd. Jason Kidd, I think at that time, alongside Gary Payton, I think most would agree they were the top 2 point guards in the NBA. You could argue by 2003, Payton was sort of getting toward the end of his prime or out of his prime. But I chose Jason Kidd over Gary Payton because of his improbable runs with the New Jersey Nets in 2002 and 2003, going to back-to-back finals. And yes, they lost. And, they lost badly to the Lakers, got swept. But you have to also take into account, now that's a guy, you talk about somebody making their teammates better. Jason Kidd epitomized that. He did not play with any top 75 player. Hell, I don't even think he played with anybody on that team that would you consider a top 125 player, other than himself. Maybe even top 150. What's the best player he had on that team? Richard Jefferson? But yet they went to back-to-back NBA finals. And you could argue that the conference was a little bit weak, But Jason Kidd did something that most people did not expect. And also, as of 2023, that first year, I think they won 50 games that first year. That's still the NBA franchise record. Still. That's still the NBA franchise record some 20 plus years later. So Jason Kidd, during that stretch between 2000 and 2003, see if it'll pop up. Should have did it a little bit earlier. And it's not popping up. But Jason Kidd, in 2 of those 3 seasons, he led the NBA in assists per game. Didn't average, high assist totals, but compared to like Jason Kidd or Magic Johnson, but it was a slower paced team. He didn't have the firepower, but to still average 9 to 10 assists per game on those teams was pretty impressive. So I'm not going to wait for the thing to pop up. And number 8, Kevin Garnett. Kevin Garnett was ferocity. He was one of the most competitive players, one of the most emotional players we've ever seen. You can't take it away from him. He was a stat-stuffing, dude, you know what I'm saying? I'm not saying he was a stat chaser, but the way he attacked the game in so many different angles. I was always more impressed with Garnett's rebounding and defensive efforts rather than his offensive game. Not to say that he wasn't a skilled offensive player, but he because of his size. In his prime, Garnett was like 6'11" and 225, 230. He wasn't the biggest guy. He wasn't the most dominant guy as far as his size. But man, Garnett in his best years would get you 20 points, 13, 14 rebounds, 5, 6 assists, 2 steals, 2 blocks. I mean, versatility out this world, good free throw shooter, had range up to 17, 18 feet consistently. I mean, just a great player, and was a harbinger of what we're going to see later on in the NBA. At number 7, I have Chris Webber. I had to put Chris Webber ahead of him at that point, not career-wise altogether, not even for the entire 2000s, but in that period of time, the reason why I got to put Chris Webber ahead of him was because of the team success. They were a team that was, during that period of time, perennially in the playoffs. I'm talking about the Sacramento Kings. He helped to turn that team around when he was traded there from the Washington. Well, actually, it was the Wizards by then. I think it was 1999. But anyway, Chris Webber, also very competitive. Skilled, one of the premier skilled passing big men the game has ever seen. Just unbelievable. And, he did have a reputation for being a bit of a choker. And that's the only reason why I have to put him a little lower. But, he did have a hell of a run with Sacramento. Him, Vlade Divac, Mike Bibby, Doug Christie, that whole squad, Bobby Jackson. At number 6, I got Tracy McGrady. Now, Tracy McGrady, of course, in 2000, I think he came over from the Toronto Raptors, and the idea was initially that they could possibly have a super team with Tim Duncan, Grant Hill, and himself. And if anything, McGrady was going to be the facilitator, and Grant Hill was going to be more of an offensive player, with Tim Duncan being the defensive anchor of that team. Perhaps not even having to score as much as, say, he did in San Antonio. But David Robinson and the Spurs talked him into staying in San Antonio. And Doc Rivers didn't help much with his cold house manners, so to speak, not allowing Tim Duncan's family to join him or, going to Orlando, whatever. Doc Rivers was the head coach at that time. But still, a team with prime Grant Hill and young Tracy McGrady still had promise. But unfortunately, Grant Hill, his foot injury was much more serious than initially thought. Missed multiple games and had countless seasons that were ruined because of his injury. Almost died from a staph infection. Finally came back, but was never the same guy. So Tracy McGrady had to reinvent himself and be a scorer. And scored that he did. All right? From 2000 to 2003, each season, him getting more and more prodigious as a scorer. I think 2002, 2003 was the first year he led the NBA in scoring, averaging an incredible 32 points per game in that era, which was very impressive to do in that era. You know what I'm saying? When teams were probably averaging, to put it into perspective, the Kings were averaging like almost 100 points a game, and that was tops in the NBA. They're like 99.5 or something. That was number one in the NBA. Other teams were averaging like 93, 94, and McGrady was averaging 32 points a game then. Now, ultimately, he didn't have the carryover effect of winning, but individually, he was very good. At number 5, I got his cousin, Vince Carter, the guy that the NBA tried to market as the face of the league. Vince Carter had all the tools, man. Vince Carter could post you up. Vince Carter had the mid-range. Vince Carter developed an outside shot. He was athletic. He could dunk on anybody. When his mind got right, and when I say right, I mean when he thought about, like he wanted to shut you down or he wanted to showcase his offensive skill set, Vince Carter could not be stopped. Unfortunately for Vince Carter, he lacked some of the passion and he lacked the meanness of a Jordan or a Kobe or a Shaq or, Bill Russell, Bird, Magic. He didn't have that in him. So, he was a nice guy, but he still played 22 years because of his sheer talent and his selflessness in a lot of ways. But, man, for a while, Vince Carter put on a show. Slam dunk contest, supplanted Dominique Wilkins and Dr. J as the greatest dunker in NBA history. Shot blockers were scared of that man because they were afraid they were going to be put on a poster. At number 4, I got Allen Iverson. At that point in time, Allen Iverson was a cultural phenomenon. Just tearing up the NBA at that time. And that 2000 run that he had with the Sixers is one of the greatest runs. Like, you talking about carrying a team. I don't know anybody, maybe Rick Barry in 1975. That's the only one that popped in my mind. I can't think of a guy that did more with less than Allen Iverson. Even LeBron had generally more talent on his teams than AI. Like Aaron McKee might have, to put it in perspective, Aaron McKee might have been the most talented guy on that team as far as offensively outside of AI. He wasn't an offensive player. George Lynch was not an offensive player. Tyrone Hill was not an offensive player. Kevin Mutombo was not an offensive player. Eric Snow was not an offensive player. Todd McCullough was not an offensive player. You know what I'm saying? The other guys off the bench, I can't think of everybody, but they weren't offensive. They were defensive, yes. But what AI did that year, you can make an argument. If it wasn't for the multiple rings that some of these other guys had, I would put AI even higher. But, man, the answer was unbelievable. At number 3, I got Kobe Bryant. Now, this is the first 3 years. The first year, Kobe was a sidekick to Shaq, but after that, he definitely became a co-partner. It was a co-partnership after that. 2000, 2001, I think Kobe went from averaging like 15.5 points per game or something like that to 27 or something. It was one of the greatest leaps of showcase of what a guy could do. Afro Kobe was a problem. Okay, Afro Kobe was an absolute beast, and with Shaq, he three-peated, and in many of those series, it was Kobe that carried the Lakers, not Shaq, especially as the mini dynasty progressed, and Shaq got a little bit more lazy, lackadaisical, to say the least. But Afro Kobe was a beast. Number 2, I got Tim Duncan. Tim Duncan was a winner. Tim Duncan may not have the versatility of Kevin Garnett, but Tim Duncan was one of the highest IQ players the game has ever seen. A great defensive player. You can make an argument that he got robbed of at least one Defensive Player of the Year. Great post scorer, great shot blocker, probably the last guy to really utilize the bank shot. Was not a raw guy, but you know what I'm saying, Tim was a guy that led by example. And, you know, for people who like to say that their 99 championship didn't count, and yeah, it's a real thing. It's funny because a lot of Laker fans and LeBron fans are very sensitive about people saying the bubble title don't count. But it was Laker fans who led the charge saying that the Spurs abbreviated title in 99 didn't count. So them winning that title in an 82-game season with no breaks in 2002, 2003 solidified the Spurs as a legit team. And by that point, Tim Duncan was the unquestioned leader of that team. And, of course, Tim Duncan won back-to-back MVPs in that time period. So he has to be number 2. By the way, I forgot to mention AI winning MVP in 2001 as well. Number 1, I got Shaq. Shaq was the most dominant. That was his peak. I have to put Shaq number 1. That was his absolute peak. Shaq won the MVP in 99, 2000. So I'm kind of not counting that year because I'm counting like 2000, 2003. But still, the fact remains that Shaq was at his absolute apex at that time. Matter of fact, let me see. He couldn't be stopped at that point. We saw what he did to Kevin Mutombo in the 2001 NBA Finals. So Shaq from 2000 to 2003, 27.8 points, 11.5 rebounds, 3.3 assists, 2.4 blocks, 57.5% shooting from the floor, 55.8% from the free throw line. So Shaq, of course, was a poor free throw shooter and was not a great shooter, I'd say, outside of 12 feet, maybe. 10 feet. He wasn't a good shooter. But he did, you know, Shaq came to the NBA raw. By his Laker championship years, he had added the spin move and the little, what is that shit you called? What was that move he had? He had the, what was it called? The Black Tornado was that spin move, I think it was. And then, of course, he had the little jump hook. And, but Shaq was just so physical, man. You couldn't stop him. When he was in shape, 330, 340, you know, at that time, he was just phenomenal. And, he became an improved passer at that point in time. He was a decent shot blocker, but decent rebounder. But, offensively, Shaq just couldn't be stopped, man. And we saw that in those NBA Finals. So, and in the playoffs in general. But anyway, that's my top 10. Guys, tell me what you guys think.